Chris Watts looked like the kind of man no one would ever suspect. A quiet husband, a caring father, a normal life in suburban America. On social media, everything seemed perfect. His wife, Shanann, often shared videos of their family, smiles, laughter, 2 young daughters running around the house, another baby on the way. From the outside, it was the ideal life, but sometimes the most dangerous stories are the ones that look the most ordinary. Behind the camera, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. Financial stress, relationship tension, distance growing between husband and wife, and something else, something hidden. Chris had started changing. He was working out more, losing weight, acting distant. And then there was another woman, a secret relationship that no one knew about. While his family believed everything was fine, Chris was already living a double life. And in his mind, a new future was forming, one where his old life didn't exist anymore. What no one realized was how far he was willing to go to make that future real, because just days later, everything would change. And the man everyone thought they knew would become the center of one of the most disturbing family crimes in modern history. On August 13th, 2018, something didn't feel right. Shanann Watts had just returned home from a business trip in the early morning hours. Security footage showed her walking into the house. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. Later that day, she missed a doctor's appointment. She wasn't answering her phone. Messages went unread. For someone as active and responsive as Shanann, this was alarming. A close friend quickly noticed something was wrong and decided to act. She went to the house. Chris Watts was there, calm, too calm. He claimed he didn't know where his wife was, said they had an emotional conversation earlier, said she left with the kids. But something didn't add up. Shanann's car was still in the garage, her phone, her purse, everything important left behind. It didn't make sense. Police were called for a welfare check. As officers walked through the house, the tension grew. Nothing looked forced. No signs of a struggle. Just silence. Chris tried to act cooperative, answering questions, staying composed, but his behavior felt off. And as investigators would soon realize, this wasn't a missing persons case. It was something much darker. Sometimes, the smallest details reveal the biggest lies. Chris Watts agreed to speak with a neighbor who had a security camera facing the street. They wanted to check if anything unusual had been recorded that morning. As the footage began to play, Chris stood there, watching, trying to stay calm. But his body told a different story. The camera showed Chris backing his truck into the driveway in the early hours of the morning. Something he didn't normally do. He moved back and forth, loading something into the truck. At first glance, nothing seemed obvious, but the longer it played, the more uncomfortable Chris became. He crossed his arms, shifted his weight, avoided eye contact. The neighbor noticed it too. Something wasn't right. Chris tried to explain it away, said he was loading tools for work, just another normal morning, but his behavior betrayed him, because this wasn't normal. This was the moment the truth started to crack through the surface. The calm, cooperative husband was starting to look like something else entirely, and investigators were paying very close attention. Because now they had a timeline, and Chris Watts was right in the center of it. That same day, Chris Watts stood in front of cameras, appearing on local news, asking for his family to come home. His voice was steady, his words carefully chosen. "I just want them back." He spoke about his daughters, about how much he loved them, about how this didn't feel real. But to many watching, something felt wrong. There was no panic, no visible desperation, just a strange calmness, almost rehearsed. His body language didn't match his words, and the internet noticed immediately. People began analyzing the interview, every movement, every expression. Why wasn't he more emotional? Why did he seem so detached? As the hours passed, suspicion grew. Behind the scenes, investigators were already building their case. They had inconsistencies in his story. They had the neighbor's footage, and they had a feeling that Chris Watts wasn't telling the truth. The man asking for his family's safe return was quickly becoming the prime suspect in their disappearance. And soon, he would have nowhere left to hide. Under pressure, the truth always finds a way out. Chris Watts was brought in for questioning. At first, he stuck to his story, calm, controlled, repeating the same version of events. But investigators were patient. They knew something he didn't. They had evidence, they had inconsistencies, and they had time. Hours passed. Then came the turning point. Chris agreed to take a polygraph test. He failed, badly. When confronted with the results, his composure started to break. His voice changed, his confidence faded, and then he offered a new version of the story. He claimed that Shanann had hurt their children, and in a moment of rage, he reacted. But even that didn't fully convince investigators. They pushed further, and slowly, piece by piece, the real story began to emerge. This wasn't a sudden act. This wasn't a moment of uncontrollable emotion. This was something far more disturbing. Because Chris Watts had been hiding the truth from the very beginning, and now, it was all coming out. The final version of the story was worse than anyone imagined. Chris Watts confessed. He admitted that he had killed his pregnant wife, and then his 2 young daughters. A crime that shocked the entire world. There was no sudden breakdown, no single moment of rage. Instead, it was a calculated decision. He wanted a new life, a fresh start. And in his mind, his family stood in the way of that future. Investigators uncovered the full timeline, the planning, the actions taken to cover everything up. It was cold, it was deliberate, and it was impossible to fully understand. In court, Chris Watts eventually pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case left behind a haunting question. How can someone appear so normal while hiding something so dark? Because Chris Watts didn't look like a monster. He looked like an ordinary man. And maybe that's what makes this story so terrifying. Sometimes, the most dangerous people are the ones you'd never suspect.